Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And this is Maggie here to join us also. And today's topic is The Emperor Has No Clothes. What we get to talk about today is all the policies and practices that we just come to accept because that's the way it's always been done. And what we get to do today is talk about actually questioning some of these things, because questioning them is the beginning to being able to implement change or recognize the need for change. And we really need to make these shifts of paradigm in order to shape the world that will sustain us going forward and that we can thrive and flourish in. So before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present, and let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs and flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, and bringing vital life energy throughout your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, any stress, any negativity or fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And this time, imagine brilliant bright light lighting you up from the inside out, nourishing and enlightening, enlivening all your molecules, all your electrons, energizing your cells, illuminating and bringing brilliance throughout all your body and being. And as you exhale any tension that's remaining, any stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together and softly, softly, softly rub your fingers against your palms to feel the deliciousness of that sensation and to bring yourselves present to this moment in your physical body right here, right now. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So the emperor has no clothes. There's so many things that we accept that we just never question because it's the way it's always been. And I was reminded of a story that I've told thinking that it was a family story, but apparently it's part of popular culture. And that's the story of the mom who is making pot roast. And when she makes pot roast or some other kind of preparation, she always cuts the end off the pot roast and puts it in the pan and puts in all the vegetables or whatever else she's cooking with it and puts it in the oven. And one day, this has been done for generations, and one day somebody just asked, well, why do you cut off the end of the pot roast? And it turned out we went to grandmom and great grandmom and found out that the end of the pot roast got cut off because the pan, it was too big for the pan. It had to be cut to be able to fit in the pan. But the practice got passed down generation after generation, even though it no longer made any sense, right? And so there's so much of our culture that we don't even think to question because that's just the way it is. And I think that that's the case in our families, in our own lives, and certainly it is in terms of culture and policy and norms when we think about norms. So the beginning of innovation is thinking. The beginning of innovation is in consciousness. And when we shift our consciousness, we have the ability to access the possible. And we've been talking about that this week a bit, where we were talking about walking in wonder. And we have the ability to step outside our knowingness of things. And then we get to see them with greater clarity. So what happens when we apply that practice of looking at what's there with new eyes? What happens when we apply that unfamiliarity to some of our systems and we look at, like, for instance, the pharmaceutical system? Like, we can look at, here are these pharmaceutical companies, and they spend tons of money on research, and they develop medicines, and then they patent the medicines that are supposed to be life-giving, and they sell those medicines, and they make lots and lots and lots and lots of money on the patents, right? On selling these medicines that we are then become we become reliant on them because supposedly they're life-giving medicines, and they very well may be. So for example, I think there's been in the news recently a new medication for Alzheimer's, and Alzheimer's is a rising plague in our country. Now, we're not looking at how to prevent Alzheimer's, you know, as much as we are looking at how to treat it. And that's one thing to look at in our medical paradigm. But this medicine is something like $50,000 a month or $53,000 a month. I don't even remember, and I don't know if I'm quoting the right numbers, but the bottom line is this medicine, if it's effective, is something that would be able to impact a growing and growing proportion of of the community, and change lives. Now, when we think about Alzheimer's, and again, this is another paradigm that we get to look at as to how crazy it is. But when we evaluate efficacy or performance or worth, we typically we're conditioned to be valuing things in a monetary way. And so when we look at this whole scourge of Alzheimer's is costing the public fortunes upon fortunes upon fortunes because of care needs. Same thing with autism. You know, to be able to support the people that the growing population of autistic people who are unable to care for themselves, or Alzheimer's patients who are unable to care for themselves, it's becoming a public crisis. So good morning, Rosalind. Welcome, welcome. You've got me on a tear this morning. I'm talking about The Emperor Has No Clothes and challenging paradigms that we just take for granted as the way things are, and how it's necessary and essential in order to usher in the world that we dream of and desire, to be questioning the things that we just take for granted, you know, to question the way that systems exist. This is sort of a practical application of what we've been talking about as far as moving into possibility and going beyond the accepted labels and the accepted realm of the possible. So good morning, Sophia. I don't think I recognize your name, and I'm thrilled to have you joining us. And welcome to everybody else who's here, even if you haven't chimed in. But we get to talk about how many things we're accepting about, you know, like without challenging, without calling out the emperor for not having any clothes. So with the pharmaceutical industry, so here we are with this incredible public crisis that is affecting families and our culture and economies. And then the pharmaceutical companies come out with a drug that's $53,000 a month. And oh, wonderful. Thank you, Sophia. I'm thrilled to have you here. And I'm sure we all are. We're kind of a growing community of folks who get together and have these chats on a weekday basis, and it's great to have you joining us. So anyway, how I actually heard a thing on NPR where the pharmaceutical company was saying that they felt that that was a fair price. Well, the truth is, when the pharmaceutical companies are developing these drugs, they're not all self-funded. That, you know, there are government grants and there are universities, and, you know, there's a lot of collaboration from the commons too that goes into the research around these drugs and medications. And I'm not necessarily an advocate of drugs and medications when I believe we need to be looking at core causes. And I have a whole big thing about core causes related to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and autism, et cetera, which we could get into at another time. But I mean, this is another paradigm that we get to challenge. We're treating symptoms. Alzheimer's and autism and the rising rates of these diseases and all kinds of cancers and et cetera, those are symptoms. We're trying to treat the symptoms, and we're doing that with drugs that have all kinds of further symptoms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, this paradigm is that the pharmaceutical companies, they're businesses, and as businesses, they get to make money, and that's part of what it's about, right? Is they're doing all this so that they can make money. Well, the thing is that if it's about public health, shouldn't it be owned by the public? I mean, shouldn't we have these companies that are researching these things in the interests of the public rather than in the interests of privatization and making money? You know, I mean, we don't challenge that paradigm because we are a country that is all oriented on business, and money is the most important thing, and making money is protected above and beyond human rights. It's craziness. And this is an example of something that we don't even think about, we don't even challenge, because that's the way it is. The pharmaceutical companies develop medications that address issues that are prominent enough that they can make a good enough profit to justify the research costs, and then they bring these things to market, right? And we don't challenge it because that's the way it's been. Another area of the emperor has no clothes, as far as I'm concerned, is the fossil fuel industry. We use fossil fuels to heat our homes, to drive our cars, etc. And a lot of us have had sort of a national pride about trying to be fossil fuel independent, you know, to be generating our own fossil fuels. And therefore it justified creating, doing practices such as fracking, for instance, which would go in and decimate communities, toxify the groundwater, create earthquakes, not to mention what it's doing to the air and the surrounding communities. And they would be able to do all this without impunity and without regulation. Do you know it's against the law to try and regulate the fossil fuel industry? I mean, how insane is that, right? And then they do all this raping and pillaging of the land, and then they sell the energy, the fossil fuel energy, not only just to us, but then they export it to other countries. So they're taking all this stuff. We're not seeing the profit from that. We are paying, and we are subsidizing their activities with our tax dollars. And meantime, there are all kinds of alternatives to fossil fuels that are truly, truly workable possibilities, and that are ecologically sound. And yet we're supporting this industry. And what else do? They create plastics. They have no accountability for those plastics. So they propagate these plastic single-use containers. And they still have plans now that their regulation, and now that we're moving away from fossil fuels, their intention is to be propagating more and more plastic items, to be ramping up the plastic production, which we don't have a solution for. And what they do is they foist off the responsibility for the pollution of the world from plastic onto the consumer, rather than being accountable for having to find a way to recycle this waste that they're creating that is going to be with us in perpetuity, or at least for hundreds of years. And how crazy is that they're not held accountable to cleaning up their mess, and that they're able to go in unregulated and decimate communities and our environment. it makes no sense, but do we question it? Thankfully, we're starting to question it a bit more, to say, well, wait a second, what's wrong with this picture, right? So what other areas are you seeing where there's this huge cognitive dissonance, you know, like where we just do not pay attention, where we accept the things, the status quo? How about the voting rights thing that's going on right now? It's some kind of crazy percentage of people throughout the country. I know it was over 70%. I'm not even going to try and quote beyond that, are for being able to support voting rights, and yet the Senate just put a kibosh on it and filibustered their way around it. So I mean, how is this okay? How is it okay that our elected representatives don't represent the will of the people? You know, we're getting to see that is vividly the fact that our elected representatives are not serving the people. They're running another agenda, and who knows what that agenda is, but they're not serving the will of the people. They're not reflecting the will of the people. And how about it just goes on and on and on, you know? So I think that we get to question. It's really important to be questioning our fundamental assumptions about the things the way they have always been. And I recognize that this is something of an incendiary concept. You know, I recognize that this is radical. It's radical to actually stand back and look at the existing paradigms and question, is this true? Is this the best way for things to be? Does this even make any sense, the way that things are? You know, does it make sense that we go buy fast foods with all kinds of packaging that is used once and then thrown into some kind of receptacle that we think is going to magically disappear this thing from the face of the earth? You know, if I can throw it away, I can throw it away from me, so I don't have to pay attention anymore. But does it make sense? You know, what are these things that we accept that really need to be redesigned? And I'm not here just to rant or complain. I'm here to talk about what awakening to our sacred activism. I think that's really what I'm talking about, is to awaken to what needs changing and what we can do. Because the truth of the matter is that we all have the ability to make change in the world. And some of us are going to do that within our own homes. Some of us are going to do it within our communities. Some of us are going to do it on an extended community in our cities or our states. And some of us may do it countrywide or globally, but we all have a capacity to make a difference and to make change. And I've had the privilege of getting to know a woman named Helen Slotjay, for instance, who is talking about the emperor has no clothes, and how there's so many things that we just take for granted. And as a result of her out of the box thinking, she was instrumental in the ending of fracking in New York State. And this is a big deal. This is a really, really, really big deal. And along the way, she was told that she was crazy, or that she was radical, or that she was criminal, or, you know, all these different things. And she moved forward with great tenacity and courage and clarity, and got the result. And this is one person that now has set a precedent for ways in which we can challenge a system that is it's kind of a David and Goliath thing. And so the first step to the David and Goliath paradigm is for David to wake up that there's Goliath, you know, and to wake up to the nature of what Goliath is, and to be undaunted, to find the inroad, to find the chink in the armor that will allow us to make a difference. So um, it's important. We're in a time of flux. We're in a time of growth. We're in a time of awakening. And in the process of this time of awakening, we do get to see the darkness more vividly. You know, we do get, it's interesting, you know, there's some light being shown on this, what was an unintelligible blackness before, and with this light being shown on it, we get to see it for the darkness that it is. And now we get to bring more light to it. And as we call it out, that is bringing the light to it. As we say no, as we wake up and look at what the world is that we really truly want to create. So I'm wondering where you are on this now that I've been on a rant here, but we get to be passionate. We get to be passionate, and we get to be creators in our world, whether it's 3D or 5D, you know, or the combination thereof, right? We get to bring 5D energy into reshaping what looks like the 3D world, right? And that means we get to be sacred activists, and thinking is a radical act. How about that? Independent thinking is a radical act. Really looking and becoming aware, bringing to light our capabilities. So Rosalind, you asked the question that we are all plagued with. We have been programmed to believe that one person can't make a difference. But you ask what one person can do. So I was talking about Helen. Helen's an attorney, and what she did was she galvanized all these different towns to pass legislation that ended up derailing the fracking industry in those towns. What can one person do? We can talk to our legislators. We can organize other people. We can change our personal patterns and behaviors. We can write articles. We can have podcasts. We can do Facebook Lives. We can educate ourselves. We can create a platform or not. You know, every change, every awareness, every awakening matters. So even if it means that I change my behaviors and I don't buy processed foods because I don't want to be contributing to the waste from the containers, or even if I carry my own bag to the grocery store instead of taking plastic bags. I mean, we can do changes in our own lives that are multitudes and multitudes of changes. And Rosalind, I know that you being who you are, you've done all kinds of things individually. And then the question is, do you have a calling to reach out beyond that? And so one of the things that we can do is to share information. And as we share information, we grow awareness, and we can grow community, and we can grow a coalition of voices. We also can engineer our own individual campaigns, you know, where we can create petitions that we launch online and get other people to sign. We can make ourselves present. You ask what one person can do. Look at, oh my gosh, what is her name? Greta Thunberg. Greta Thunberg, she was a 16-year-old kid. 16 years old. She started camping out on the parliament steps in Sweden. And every Friday, instead of going to school, to call for awakening around climate change and taking radical action. This is one little girl. And she created a global movement. So what one person can do is only limited by our imagination. There was, I think there was a kid named Trevor who started collecting blankets for the homeless, and that has developed into a big movement. There are all kinds of people who have started organizations. Everything starts with one person. And so we can create coalitions of like-minded people. I mean, one of the things, whatever little part it plays in this, is I started a podcast with my business partner, Scott Billy, called Sustainability Now, to raise awareness, to propagate information, to create a forum for networking and connection. And there's nothing extraordinary about me. It was just that I had a need to do something to create and propagate hope. And I was excited to find solutions. So we all do our part, and it can look a multitude of different ways. It doesn't have to be something in the public eye. You know, it's really about waking up and following our passions. So Elaine says, live by example and do what is in your now to do for the love of all, even if it is to pick up trash in areas when you see it. Elaine, good to hear I'm not the only one that does that, because I consider that this is my world. You know, so when I see trash, most often I pick it up and find a place to throw it away, even though there is no away to, it's just, there's a way from me, but no away really. So yeah, and the thing is that we can, that's one way to be. I mean, being being a bright light in the world is a powerful impact. That's something powerful that we can do. And like I said, people are called to all different levels of action. And whether it be being the light and love, whether it be picking up trash, whether it be, for instance, refusing plastic bags, or talking to your grocer and asking what they do with the food that they throw away, that comes due for the due date or the sell by date or whatever, and maybe find people to redistribute the food to. There are all kinds of organizations on all kinds of areas that do that kind of thing, that go and pick up food and distribute it to people who don't have enough to eat. I mean, there are multitudes of ways to make a difference. We can go to our grocers and say, is it possible to, instead of putting that in plastic bags, is it possible to wrap it in paper? You know, to talk to the grocery chains. You know, it's like whatever your level of engagement, but let's wake up to see things that need shifting and question them, and not just willingly in a daze and a haze accept that this is how things have to be. As we start to recognize that they don't have to be that way, I kind of believe, again, one of these working hypothesis beliefs, that thoughts are things. And the more of us that start to recognize that things can be different, you know, that we can have a system that is actually promoting health instead of trying to treat disease or maintain disease, maintain when people are diseased. You know, like to be thinking these thoughts and to be talking about these thoughts and sharing these thoughts, it's helping to dissolve that other existing paradigm, you know, by challenging, like it was a kid in the story that called the emperor out for having no clothes, you know, to be starting to call out these politicians, make a call and say, wait a second, how dare you have dismantled or derailed the voting rights bill? How dare you do that? For instance, you know, it's like, we need to be able to vote. We need to be able to be represented. How dare you promote gerrymandering? How dare you allow this to continue? You know, how is it that we have this system where it's not really our votes that count, but it's an electoral college that was designed to keep the control of the politician, the political figures in this sort of elite group? I mean, there's so many things that we're waking up to and that we're being called to activism around now because they're being made visible. So we get to participate, you know, to whatever level we're called to participate. And so, you know, I'm kind of, we talked about earlier in this week, living between worlds, walking between worlds. So, you know, to be presencing ourselves to our divinity and our creatorship and the transcendence of this matrix kind of reality that we live in, and also to be recognizing or engaging in the game we came here to play. You know, like if we can view this as an incredible video game, we get to take on the parts and roles that we want to take on, and the challenges that we want to take on. And I believe that we really truly can create radical, profound transformation from this place of vision and possibility. And so Elaine says, yes, and don't underestimate the power of the vibrations flowing from the awakened heart. Exactly. Is moving beyond all words or minds and understanding. Absolutely. So I believe that when we awaken from this dream to like see what's there, and we were talking about this yesterday, and that's the awe and the wonder, but when we can see what's there, when we awaken to it, then we have the capacity to envision a world beyond that. And that, and not only envision it, but like I said, we can play in that game. And it's important, I think, to maintain the perspective that, you know, it's what's real and what's not real. That's my challenge. And I believe that maybe I don't even know what I believe about reality at this point. But in any case, we get to engage. So Rosalind, is that helpful? Does that answer your question in any way? That we all make a difference, whether we want to or not. We all have an impact. I have there's a mentor and friend who says that all the time, that whether we want to or not, we make an impact. And I think we get to call out the emperor, and it's an important thing. So we get to muster the courage to do that, because it's often against the tide. But the more of us that do it, the more momentum it builds. And the more we get to dissolve that overarching existing paradigm or dream. And Elaine says, when you awaken to the dream that you're actually dreaming, you can assist in the dream, knowing that it's a dream from a place of true gratitude and loving bliss. Exactly. So it's kind of like lucid dreaming, right? We get to be lucid dreamers. So in other words, we get to awaken to the dream. We get to see all these we know that dreams often have kind of irrational connections and storylines. And the truth is, when we look at our current waking dream here, we can find some of these, we can find lots and lots and lots of these basic assumptions, like here, another one that just I see is that corporations have status as humans, and that we actually, how about that the vaccine industry has no liability? How about that it doesn't matter if people are disabled or die or beyond, there's no liability to the vaccine industry. And now there's a global vaccination movement And there's no liability to the vaccine industry for whatever might happen. It's craziness, right? How, I mean, does it make any sense at all? So it's kind of like the inability to regulate the fossil fuel industry, right? Just craziness. So we get to question these things, and we get to imagine a brighter or a more equitable, beautiful, rich, human-centered future rather than a money-driven future, perhaps. So dream with me. Let's do that. And let's have a lucid dream in this dream. And let's call out the emperor. So I'm counting on you to do that with me. And I think that's it for today. I'll get off my soapbox. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And when Maggie and I go live each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page, maybe we're not done. Rosalind says, re-entry back to work in the office looks like wearing a mask if you're not vaccinated. Well, are they making you submit some kind of form that says you're vaccinated? I'm curious about that. There's a lot of science that supports otherwise, Rosalind. There was a summit called The Truth About Vaccines, and you can still purchase it. And there are lots of medical experts and scientific experts that are talking about all kinds of science around the vaccines and the virus. And I'm sure that you can find a way to still purchase it. There is a lot of information out there to challenge the prevailing paradigm. It's not necessarily easy to find. You might look up Dr. Mercola, M-E-R-C-O-L-A, and get on his mailing list. And Rosalind says, if you provide docs, you had 2 vaccine shots, you don't have to wear a mask. I'm not vaccinated. So you actually have to provide docs. That's interesting. There is a thing called the, I don't know if it's called the Nuremberg. I don't know if it's the Nuremberg Treaty or the Nuremberg something, but it has to do with the fact that nobody has to be forced to participate in a human experiment against their will. And it comes from the Holocaust, where prisoners were experimented upon. And this vaccine is still experimental. It only has provisional, all the vaccines only have provisional approval. They are still experimental. And there are people that are making legal cases around this. So, and there's a lot of information that about treatments and cures for COVID that, now watch, this FaceTime is probably going to get banned because I'm talking about this stuff. But there's a lot of information that that is available to give us other alternatives. So I did watch a hearing. It was a physician who had participated in a bunch of research and beyond, actually, around COVID, and was part of a frontline team. And I believe it was in Argentina and Puerto Rico. I believe that's what he said, where the healthcare workers were taking ivermectin. Ivermectin is a medicine that's been around for 28 years. It won some kind of award for its efficacy with no negative side effects. It's used as a veterinary drug. It's an anti, what am I going to say? It's an anti-parasitic, I think. Anyway, apparently these healthcare workers, the ivermectin was 98% effective. And the video that I watched was of either of a congressional or Senate hearing where this doctor was pleading with them to introduce ivermectin as a treatment for COVID, and just pleading with them to share the protocol because it was so profoundly effective. Thank you, Sophia. Sophia says malaria, but it's been used for years and years and years, and apparently it's been very effective in treating COVID. Anyway, there is lots of information out there. You have to dig for it. And what the result of that for me, of digging into that information, is that I don't know what's true and what's not true. And it has brought me to question the prevailing paradigm, and then to make my own personal decision based on the information that I've received. So I encourage everybody to do their own research and to make an educated decision, and to be looking for when the emperor has no clothes, because that happens a lot. And it seems to happen a lot around medicine. And certainly that's not the only area, but that's an area that I'm very aware of. And yeah, so we get to inform ourselves and to challenge the existing paradigm, and to hold information and belief with open hand. Because whatever the belief, whatever the idea, when we hold it with a clenched fist, it actually holds us. And then it closes off the opportunity for greater learning and greater exploration and expansion. And for me, I'm all about freedom. And that means freedom of choice. It means spiritual freedom. It means freedom of heart and soul. And I believe that our path to freedom is through consciousness. So, and then again, that's my working hypothesis. Like, don't take anything I'm saying as truth. Do your own investigating. And with that, I still encourage you to call out the naked emperor, or at least maybe he's wearing underwear, we can hope, right? And so Maggie and I, as I said, go live each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. I so appreciate you joining me for these conversations. And it's as enriching to me as I hope it is to you. So lots and lots of love. And we all get to make this a lucid dream.